Is a Saturday afternoon, and we're about 30 minutes away from kickoff with the University of Georgia and Auburn, a big road test for the University of Georgia. After four home games, Georgia will be hitting the road today, of course, to take on the Tigers of Auburn. It'll be at Jordan Hare Stadium in Auburn, Alabama. Behind us is a beautiful Sanford Stadium. Of course, it's empty at the moment because this is the first road game for the Bulldogs this season. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in anticipation of Georgia playing Auburn and also some of the early games and look at some of the early games. In fact, we have on our monitor here, and I keep looking over at the monitor, quite a surprising score right now from Lexington, Kentucky. The University of Kentucky really taking it to the Florida Gators today. The current score 33-14, about 4 minutes left to go in that ball game. And Kentucky dominant. Running back David. Okay, we're connecting back. Okay, I got you. We're connecting. Yeah, we had some technical issues, but we were talking about Georgia or Florida rather, in Kentucky. One of the early games in the SEC and in college football today, and Kentucky's really taking it to the University of Florida this afternoon, and just checking on some of the other scores. And okay, we need to refresh that one as well. A lot of technical difficulties, but in some early scores, as we anticipate Georgia and Auburn kicking off at 3:30. Penn State is winning currently over Northwestern 27-13. And then I guess a highly anticipated, highly touted kind of game. Southern Cal, the eighth ranked team in the country, taking on Colorado, and Southern Cal winning that game pretty handily at the moment, 48-27. That's going into the fourth quarter. And again, Kentucky. Now, this is very relevant for the University of Georgia, of course. Both of these teams are in the SEC Eastern Division. And you have Kentucky currently beating Florida rather handily up in Lexington, Kentucky, 33-14. It kind of exposes the weakness of Florida, but it also kind of sets up an anticipation for Georgia and Kentucky playing next week at Sanford Stadium. Kentucky looking very good offensively. They're kind of sharp. They have a pretty decent passing game, a very strong running game, a big offensive line that's pretty challenging for any team that will be playing them. So Kentucky winning big time today, 33-14, as they are in the fourth quarter. About 4 minutes left to go in that game. Texas A&M taking care of Arkansas today, 34-16, and that's getting late in the game. And some of the other early scores: Virginia beating Boston College by a score of 14-0. So we have Georgia and Auburn. That, of course, coming up at 3:30. It'll be on CBS from Jordan Hare Stadium in Auburn, Alabama. And so far, Georgia is a 14-point favorite. Now, you got to kind of wonder about that. Why is Georgia only a 14-point favorite? Auburn, I've watched some of the Auburn footage, and defensively and offensively, to be honest with you, Auburn's not a very good football team. They have some pieces that are pretty decent, pretty good, but Georgia really, really, defensively and offensively, really should dominate this game. This shouldn't be much of a ball game, to be honest with you. So, but a lot of Georgia fans are skittish. That's how we are under the influence of Larry Munson and Vince Dooley for so many years. Those guys never met an opponent that they didn't think, wow, this is the greatest team we've ever played before. By the way, if you have a comment or a question about the game coming up with Georgia and Auburn, you can give us a comment or a question. Maybe you have a prediction for the game coming up. Now, our prediction earlier in the week was 35-14. We're going to moderate that just a tad and call it 35-7. I don't know. I'm not going to give Auburn much of a chance to score on the Georgia defense. They might score a touchdown, maybe sort of kind of, especially if the game gets out of hand early. But I really anticipate Georgia winning this game. But it is a road game. It is the SEC road game, and you don't want to give any opponent in the SEC any kind of hope when you go on the road like this. But Georgia, the number one team in the country, of course, always back-to-back national champions. Always when Georgia goes on the field, the other team is going to give the Bulldogs their best shot because they, believe, well, if we can knock off Georgia, it'll make big headlines and we'll get attention for our program and it will be a great accomplishment. That's the way it is when you've been the top dog, so to speak, in college football for the past 2 years, and you go on the road, especially in the SEC. Dakota says 38-3 Georgia winning. I have a sneaking suspicion, Dakota. I'm going to, kind of agree with you that it's going to be close to that. This should be a dominating game. Now, what's kind of stirring up Bulldog Nation is, okay, this is the first road game. Is Carson Beck, is he going to show up today as that dominant quarterback that we want him to be? Now, I got to tell you, Carson Beck is having a good season by any standards. Currently, Carson Beck is 93 of 128 in passing. He has 1,184 yards in passing, 6 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Georgia currently in total yards is averaging 496 and a half yards per game, almost 500 yards a game for Georgia. Auburn averaging just a little over 371 yards. Georgia's averaging 337 yards passing. And now that includes Beck and Vandegrift and Stockton as well. But Auburn only averaging about 175 yards in passing. In rushing, Georgia is averaging 159 yards a game. Auburn almost 200 yards a game. But that's about what they have. They have a running game, running attack, not much as far as as far as passing is concerned. Now, what about Auburn? What have they done this season? They opened the season with a win over Massachusetts, 59-14. Then they traveled out to California to take on the University of California, and they won that game 14-10. Yeah, wow, okay, that's a pretty good win over Cal out in California. But actually, California is not a very good football team. But Auburn was able to win 14-10. Then Auburn took out Samford University 45-13. Now, last week, Auburn traveled down to College Station to take on Texas A&M. The result was they lost that game 27-10, and it really wasn't that close. Texas A&M pretty well dominated Auburn. Auburn was able to score on a defensive touchdown. Auburn didn't score a touchdown last week. They had a field goal, but they were able to score on a interception, pick six, in that game. So that's where where Auburn stands at the moment. They're 3-2 on the year. So far, Georgia, of course, opened with a big win over UT Martin, 48-7. They've taken out Ball State, 45-3. South Carolina, 24-14. Then last week, they took out UAB, University of Alabama, at Birmingham, 49-21. So, Georgia comes into this game undefeated and number one. Andre, how you doing, my man? Rooting for our beloved Georgia Bulldogs from down here in Brazil. Yeah, we love it. We have an international audience here on our program today. And Andre, we hope you're able to see the game. I'm sure there's access to the game. It's on the CBS network. Now, what about some of the injuries that Georgia has had? It looks like Ladd McConkey will be playing today. He's been warming up, and he looks like he's ready to go. Hey, Chris, how you doing, my man? Good to hear from you from Gainesville, Georgia. It looks like Ladd McConkey will be playing today. Now, the extent of his activity, we don't know, but he's been warming up. Also, it looks like Kendall Milton will be playing today. He might have some limitation. McConkey, of course, dealing with a back injury, but it looks like he'll be able to go today, and he's ready to go. The word is he's been lobbying Coach Kirby Smart and telling Coach Smart, hey, I'm ready to go. I want to play. I want to get in there. And so we will probably see Ladd McConkey, and that'll be a good sight for University of Georgia fans. Kendall Milton's been dealing with an ankle sprain or an MCL injury for the past few weeks. And it looks like Milton will be able to play today. He's on the depth chart. He and Dejon Edwards will be handling most of the rushing game for Georgia. Roderick Robinson not able to go today. He's the one dealing with the ankle sprain, and he's still recovering. And of course, Dylan Bell and Cash Jones will also be in the backfield for Georgia. Javon Bullard looks like he will be playing some today. The level of his activity is going to be questionable. There goes Kentucky again, trying to score another touchdown. About 2 minutes to go in that game. Really a surprising game. It's surprising to us, but we haven't really been that in tune or in touch with Kentucky football. But Kentucky looks very good, very sharp today. But Florida is being exposed as a very weak team, offensively and defensively. Of course, they took out Tennessee, and the anticipation was, well, here comes the Gators. But it looks like now they're kind of coming down to earth. And then that makes, the question about, well, what about Tennessee and how good actually is Tennessee if Florida can beat Tennessee? But for Georgia, it looks like some of the wounded will be back in action today, and that's good news. So we got a 38-3 prediction from Dakota. Now, I myself 35-7. I've gone from 35-14 to 35-7. It's kind of hard to shut out an SEC opponent on their home field. But Georgia, seriously, honestly, looking at the statistics and studying the game film, looking at these two teams with the talent gap that you have between these two teams, you just got to think Georgia's going to dominate this game. The only thing that might cause that not to be true is if Georgia has some turnovers, if Auburn gets some momentum. And I'm sure Coach Hugh Freeze, who is a very good football coach, coming to Auburn from Liberty University, of course, a good recruiter, and Auburn's going to be catching up with recruiting. But he doesn't really have a lot to work with, especially at quarterback. In fact, when you have Charles Barkley, who played basketball, of course, for Auburn, saying, "Man, we need some quarterback play." When you have the basketball guy chiming in, then, you might be having some troubles. The quarterbacks for Auburn, Peyton Thorne, he'll be starting today. Robbie Ashford and Holden Grenier. Those guys, last week, for instance, Auburn completed only 9 of 26 passes, through for only 56 yards last week against Texas A&M. Now, the SEC schedule for today, the early games, 12 noon games, Kentucky has just beaten Florida. Looks like 33-14. That game has gone final. And it looks like Texas A&M is going to beat Arkansas. So those are the early SEC games. Now, the 3:30 game, of course, is Georgia and Auburn. It's on CBS coming up in just about 15 minutes or so. And then the 4:00 game this afternoon, Missouri, number 23, Missouri, has traveled to Nashville. They'll be taking on Vanderbilt. That game will be on the SEC network. The 6:00 game tonight, a very interesting game. It should be a very entertaining game, indeed. After Georgia takes care of business with Auburn, hopefully we can turn it over to ESPN and watch LSU visiting Ole Miss in Oxford. So that should be an interesting game. Another very interesting game on the SEC network, especially for the SEC Eastern Division, is at 7:30 at South Carolina at Tennessee. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how Tennessee wants to get revenge over South Carolina for that huge loss that Tennessee took at the hands of South Carolina last year. That really kind of knocked any kind of hope for Tennessee to make the college football playoffs out the window. But I tell you what, South Carolina is a good football team. Spencer Rattler, he's the real deal at quarterback. And Tennessee, with Tennessee being beaten by Florida, Florida being destroyed by Kentucky today, you got to wonder, okay, what really is the talent level at the University of Tennessee for this year? Now, Tennessee is the 21st ranked team in the country. South Carolina unranked. That should be an interesting game. Should be a good game. Then the 9 o'clock game on ESPN is Alabama at Starkville taking on Mississippi State. That's the 9 o'clock game Eastern, 8 o'clock, of course, in the Central Time Zone. So that's the SEC schedule for today. But we're all of our eyes as Bulldog Nation. We've got our eyes focused on Auburn, and we're going to look and see what Georgia is going to do today. I think what Georgia fans want to have is a good, crisp game. Really get this offense going. We want to feel better about what's happening with Georgia offensively, some defense domination. You just got to anticipate that. Now, if Georgia struggles in this game, that's going to raise a lot of questions about Georgia that are yet to be answered. I don't anticipate any kind of upset coming from Auburn today, but you just, stranger things have happened. You just never know. In action from last night, Oregon State took out Utah last night. Oregon State going into that game was the 19th ranked team in the country. Utah was the 10th ranked team in the country. And I tell you what, Oregon State looked very good. DJ Uangalele, the quarterback for Oregon State. Yeah, he's that guy that was at Clemson. In the early games today, again, USC is really taking care of business against Colorado in Boulder. Penn State looks like it's going to win over Northwestern. Florida has lost at Kentucky big time, and Texas A&M is taking out Arkansas. Clemson is winning over Syracuse, and Virginia is beating Boston College. Now, later on today, again, the 3:30 game, you have Georgia at Auburn. And then at 3:30, you have Michigan at Nebraska. Michigan, the number 2 ranked team in the country, taking on the Cornhuskers. And Nebraska is so thirsty for some kind of win that may point to the fact that they're rebuilding and trying to get back to national prominence, and they're making some progress with that. So you got to maybe keep an eye out on that game. A very interesting game also at 3:30 on ABC, and we'll be going back and forth from ABC to CBS to ABC. Apparently, number 24 Kansas taking on Texas at 3:30 on ABC. Then you have Missouri at Vanderbilt at 4 o'clock on the SEC Network. LSU at Ole Miss at 6 o'clock. Oregon at Stanford on the Pac-12 network. And who gets the Pac-12 network? It's kind of hard to find. Iowa State will be at number 14 Oklahoma tonight. Another game that will be kind of interesting that we'll be keeping our eyes on is Notre Dame at Duke. That'll be 7:30 on the ABC network. A very interesting game. Notre Dame, of course, losing last week, that heartbreaker to Ohio State. Duke playing very good. Duke is playing very good. And so that will be an interesting game. Now, Notre Dame goes into that contest with a, as the favorite, but that'll be interesting. Duke looks very good. Again, at 7:30, it is South Carolina at Tennessee. Washington and Arizona a little later on. Boy, Washington's getting a lot of love. In fact, Kirk Herbstreit from ESPN has Washington as his number 1 team in the country. Isn't that interesting? Currently, they're number 7 in the coaches poll. But Herbstreit says, look, no team is playing better than the University of Washington. Penix is their quarterback. He's a very good quarterback. He's very impressed with Washington. So I don't know. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Alabama again at Mississippi State, Nevada at Fresno State. Quincy, how you doing, my man? Quincy Lockett, we love him. Go Dogs, we're hunting. Yes, we are. 2 back-to-back national championships. Just 3 years ago, we were saying, oh, man, I wish Georgia could win a national championship. And we had some high hopes with these high recruiting classes. And And we had, an anticipation that Georgia's going to do very good and they're going to make the playoffs. Boom, wham, 2 years later, we're back to back national champions. And again, when your team wins, it's we. When your team loses, it's they, right? That's how we are. That's how it goes. In the speaking of the AP top 20, Georgia's number one, followed by Michigan, Texas, Ohio State, Florida State, Penn State. Is Florida State playing this week? I don't think so. They may be off. Florida State, Penn State, Washington, number 7, USC, Oregon, Utah, Notre Dame, Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Washington State, Duke, Florida, Oregon State, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Florida, Missouri, Kansas, and Fresno State, rounding out the top 25 in the AP. So I'm ready to go. I've got my popcorn and my Mountain Dew. My recliner is calling, and we're going to be watching Georgia from the comfort of our home. It'd be nice to be in the stadium, but, the thing is, if I could get in a transporter, one of those things from Star Trek, and just, hey, Roy, how you doing? If I could get in one of those transporters and just go to the stadium and then come back home without fighting all the traffic, that would, if I could borrow somebody's helicopter, who knows? That would be a good thing, but I'll enjoy it from the comfort of my home. And that way I can flip around and watch some of the other games as well. So here's our prediction. Georgia winning today, 35-7. We're going to see how close it's going to be. We'll be back with you at halftime to get your half opinions about what Georgia is doing during what Georgia's done during the first half. Hopefully, we'll be able to be with you a little later on. Hey, Chris, we will tell Matthew, our producer, that you said hey, indeed, and we'll pass that along to him. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go get them, dogs. We'll be back with you at halftime. Until then, Chris Hall here with you.